Okay, so today we're going to be talking about choosing the right pet for your family, which is a fun topic for everyone and one that's really important, especially now. It does seem that a lot of folks are taking this time that we are all at home to do their homework and consider a pet, and in many cases add a pet to their household. So this is a presentation that's near and dear to my heart since I do work for an open admission animal shelter. Of course, we rely very heavily on adoptions to maintain our population in the building, but we also, as an open intake shelter, take all owner surrenders in the county. And we definitely like to make sure that if folks are choosing to add a pet to the family, that they are doing so responsibly and knowing what they're getting into, so that way it's a lifelong commitment and not a temporary one. So we're going to focus on all of the things that you need to really look at and think about and be prepared for if you're going to be bringing an animal into your home. And for the most part, I'm pretty generic, so this will apply to just about any animal, with maybe just a few exceptions. I definitely leaned more towards cats, dogs, and rabbits because those are the three most common pets that we see in the household. But definitely these thought processes that we're going to go through are things that would apply to any pet, whether you're getting a hamster or a bearded dragon or a cockatiel. These are all things that you would want to consider before you add a pet to your home. So we'll get started first by saying congratulations. I think adding a pet to your home is a pretty awesome experience. It's super exciting. We all love adding those furry family members. But the important thing is to focus on all of the work and research that we need to be doing before we bring a pet into our home. So when anybody asks me my advice, I always say, first and foremost, just make sure you're thinking before you're doing. Acquiring an animal should not be an impulse decision. It should be something that you spend a considerable amount of time on, because this is a commitment that's going to last at bare minimum for a couple of years, depending on the type of animal that you're getting, to upwards of 20 years or more. So it is really important that you know what you're getting into, that you're prepared to handle all of the daily husbandry and the expenses that go along with it, and that the members of your family are equally as prepared and willing to commit to that animal's care. So first and foremost, it's all about the research. I cannot stress that enough. Please make sure that you are learning everything you can about the animal that you want to add to your family. And you can learn this information from trusted professionals. I always tell folks to go to veterinarians and speak to them first before you bring a pet home. One, because I always advocate it's a good idea to have a vet kind of in your back pocket before you bring an animal home. Know where you would take that animal for regular wellness checks as well as for emergency care. And it's nice to kind of snoop on your vet a little bit before the animal comes home, so you can decide if it is a facility that you like and want to continue using. But also because veterinarians have a wealth of information that they can share with you, to let you know what you should expect in terms of medical care and expenses, and then best practices for feeding, training, things like that. So that way you really do have a good basis for what you're getting into before you bring an animal home. Other trusted professionals could include groomers if you're thinking about an animal that might need a little bit more maintenance than what you can provide in the grooming department. And you can also be looking at trainers as well, as long as you're making sure, again, that those trainers are credentialed and educated in their field. Additionally, you can always reach out to animal welfare organizations. So that's a big part of my job at the shelter, is making sure that people are prepared for the pets that they want to add to their families. And many other staff members as well are absolutely thrilled to answer any questions that we can to make sure that you are ready to go before that animal comes into your home, because we, especially working in the sheltering world, want to make sure that the animals that go to your homes stay there. So we are always there to provide any information that we can, and all of the staff members at DuPage County, as well as in most other shelters, at bare minimum have a bachelor's degree in animal science. Many of us have advanced degrees, so we are truly experts in our field. So you definitely want to lean on those resources when you're going to be bringing a pet home. You can also look online as long as you can verify your resources. And many large-scale animal welfare organizations will have a fair bit of information that's publicly available just through quick Google searches. So the Humane Society of the United States is one, the ASPCA, and even Best Friends Animal Society. These are all really large-scale organizations that do deal with a wide variety of domestic animals, and they can really be an awesome resource if you need a little bit of extra information. Now, probably the biggest thing that I really stress on top of doing your research so you understand animal care is to make sure that everyone in the family is on board with bringing a pet into the home. So we hear this all the time, especially from young adults that maybe still live at home with mom and dad, or maybe we're away at college and they're coming home for the summer. We always hear, oh, my dad didn't want a cat, but I knew if I brought one home, he would just fall in love. From a shelter employee's perspective, that is a terrible plan. Inevitably, somebody gets frustrated with the pet in the home, doesn't want to deal with the cleanup, doesn't want to feed, maybe has allergies, is not a fan of the smell that maybe animals are bringing to the table. You're going to find a lot of dissent in the family if everyone is not on board for that animal's care. And in fact, if you are going to be adopting, most shelters, DuPage County Animal Services included, actually does require that all members of the household come in for that exact reason. We want to make sure that everyone is on the same page, everyone is expecting the pet, and everybody is prepared to take care of them. Now, along with that, you want to make sure that you're identifying the individuals in your family that are going to be responsible for care. So who is going to be doing what for that pet and when? And it's a good idea to even have a schedule. So thankfully, my parents, when I was growing up, were very understanding of my need to surround myself with a bunch of animals. And my siblings were definitely into pets as well. So to make sure that we didn't argue amongst ourselves and to make sure that our pets got the care that they needed, we had chore wheels. So we all had specific tasks that changed every day or every week to make sure that that animal's needs were being met. And that's definitely something that we stress to families should be discussed before a pet comes home. So that way we don't have kids that are feeling put upon if it's their turn to feed the pet breakfast or dinner, or do one of the less desirable chores like scoop poop in the backyard or clean a litter box. It's a good idea that that's prepared for before the pet is in your home. You should also definitely make sure you have a backup plan in place. So if it is going to be mom or dad's job to clean the litter box, you do want to make sure that somebody else in the family is prepared and knows what to do as well. Just in case you fall sick, you're out on vacation, you never know when you may not be present in the home, and there does need to be a backup family member that's able to take over your care duties. And of course, we should not rely on our children to be primary caregivers. So a lot of what I discuss here tonight are actually issues that we've seen that have led to owner surrenders of pets in shelters. And this is a big one. So we hear this quite a bit, especially with our small animals like our guinea pigs, rabbits, hamsters, etc., where this animal was purchased or adopted to be the pet for a child in the home. And then inevitably that child gets bored with the pet or just gets bored with the basic care of the pet. Perhaps they're still playing with it, but they don't want to clean the cage anymore. And then that falls on mom and dad get frustrated and the pet ends up with us. So I always stress, if you're getting your child a pet, that is fantastic, but we do have to be realistic with our expectations. Most children are going to need some supervision or possibly even a parent to step in and take over care from time to time to make sure that that animal is properly attended to. You also want to be aware of allergies, and this is a big reason that shelters like DuPage County Animal Services require all members of the household to come in. Basically, we kind of want to rub that animal's fur on everybody just to make sure there's no immediate reactions. Allergic or allergy issues are one of the biggest reasons that we do see animals surrendered at the shelter. I would actually go so far as to say that that is the #1 reason that we see animals surrendered. So you want to make sure that everyone touches and interacts with a pet before it comes home. So that way you can get an inkling of whether or not there's going to be an issue. And I always recommend meeting your pet, rubbing it on you, putting your face in their fur, making sure you don't have a reaction, but give it a day. So if you can meet that pet and then come back the next day or the following day to bring it home, that's even better because it gives your body a little bit of time to decide whether or not that it's okay to have those animals around. When in doubt, you can ask, especially if you are adopting, if the shelter has a blanket or a bed that that pet has slept on recently that you could bring home with you. So we actually do this frequently with individuals that are unsure of whether or not they're allergic to cats. We will give them a blanket that the cat has been sleeping on in their kennel and allow them to actually sleep with it that night to see if they get stuffed up, if they have any respiratory issues, if they get hives. That's a really good indicator of whether or not that pet can be in your home. And I always advocate as well, if you're looking at small animals, make sure you're also considering bedding and feed. So we at the shelter always, of course, advocate for keeping small animals in paper bedding, but some people do choose wood chips. That can actually incite some allergic reactions, as can the hay that should serve as the primary diet for rabbits and guinea pigs primarily. So not only do you need to make sure that you are not allergic to the pet you want to add to your home, you have to make sure you're not allergic to the stuff that they need to sustain themselves. And then, of course, there is that burning question. Once you've gotten everybody on board with bringing an animal into your home, do you adopt or do you shop? Well, of course, I'm a shelter employee, so I'm going to advocate above all else that you adopt. And for several really important reasons. For one, you're saving a life. So about 7.5 million animals end up in shelters in this country every year. The numbers vary a bit, and we've actually seen a slight decline in that trend, which is awesome. But we still have so many homeless pets in this country that are living out their lives in shelters. So we want to advocate for adoption so we can diminish part of that pet overpopulation problem and clear up some cage spaces in the shelter. And in fact, when you are saving a life by adopting, you are really saving two, because you're saving the life of the animal you're bringing home, but you're also saving the life of the animal that now has space in a shelter that can be cared for and not left outdoors or in a home that's not well suited for them. Adoption also generally tends to be less costly. So typically your adoption fees are going to be less than what you would pay for a pet in a pet store or from a breeder. And then, of course, when you adopt, your pets are going to come already vaccinated with age-appropriate vaccines. They'll be microchipped, and they'll be spayed or neutered, of course, wherever appropriate. So you're getting a lot of medical care at a fairly low cost, whereas if you were to purchase a pet from a store or from a breeder, that's going to be an additional expense you'll have to consider. And of course, you're going to be helping to control the pet overpopulation problem. Adopting means that you're helping and not contributing. So even if you do purchase from a responsible breeder, which we will talk about here in a moment, we're still contributing to that pet overpopulation problem. We have, again, so many animals that are homeless and in need of a family. Even when we breed responsibly, we're still making more animals and kind of adding to that issue. And then, of course, when you adopt, you get unconditional love. So I am a firm believer that adopted animals know that they have been rescued. And you get to look at lovely faces like Camille, who's pictured here on the slide. Camille was actually one of our pets at the shelter. She came to us when her owner sadly passed away and didn't have any family members to take her. And she's a senior gal, and she's got some health issues. And so she sat with us for a while, but she found the exact right home. And that is the absolute look of love that her adopted mama gets to see every day, because she chose to save Camille's life. Now, if you do decide that adoption is not the right choice for you, and you do want to go through a breeder, perhaps you've got a very specific type of animal in mind, what I really want to advocate above all else is that you say no to commercially bred pets. So if you go to a pet store and you see any of these adorable animals here on the slide, so these puppies, these kittens, and these rabbits, they're typically going to be coming from reputable breeders. So that means large-scale breeders that mass produce with little to no concern of the long-term health of these animals, their genetics, and of course, they have little to no concern for the well-being of their parents. They are just viewed as basically breeding factories. So when we see cute animals like these, always please remember that they're coming from places like this. So everybody is familiar with puppy mills. I feel like that is something that the public has been fairly well informed on. But what a lot of people don't know is that all of those other animals you see at pet stores are coming from mill situations as well. So there are kitten mills, there are bunny mills, there are guinea pig mills, anything you can think of. Unfortunately, there is somebody who is sacrificing animal welfare to make money off of them. And that's what we're going to be getting from pet store environments. They are mass ordering these animals to be sold to the public. So that means we're going to see breeders that are mass producing. And anytime that occurs, the animals end up in living conditions such as you can see on the slide. So if you have decided that a shelter is not for you, and that is a perfectly acceptable decision, you do want to choose a responsible breeder. And that can sometimes be a challenging task. So I've laid out a few guidelines here that will hopefully help you, if this is the route you want to go, to find a breeder that is being responsible and that does care about not only the welfare of the puppies or other young animals that they are producing, but that also cares for the welfare of the animals that they are using as breeders. So first and foremost, you want to make sure that you meet the breeder. And when you meet the breeder, you're going to want to do a little snooping. So any reputable breeder should be more than thrilled to invite you to their facility and give you a full tour. So there should not be any back area that you cannot see. So when you're on that tour, you're going to want to look around and see if the facility is clean. Does it have a pleasant odor? You want to make sure that you're allowed to meet the animals, not just the puppy, kitten, or other that you're interested in possibly purchasing, but all of the animals. You want to see how they appear. Are they clean? Have they been groomed? Do they seem to be in good health? Do they have good weight? That's going to let you know a lot about that breeder and the quality of care that he or she provides. You also want to see how the animals interact with the breeder and with you. Because not only is that going to tell you a bit about how that breeder might be treating and interacting with those animals, but that's going to give you a good sense of who that animal is going to be when they come home with you. So a quality breeder is going to spend a lot of time socializing their young animals to ensure that they don't have any inherent fear of people and that they're comfortable being handled by strangers. Poor quality breeders aren't going to do that. So you're going to see animals that are skittish, that might be reserved, might even be a little defensive of your presence. So that's a good assessment, again, of the quality of breeder, but also the temperament of the animal that you're going to be bringing home. So all animals have very critical socialization periods in their very young juvenile stages. And if those are missed or mishandled, that can lead to long-term issues that are often difficult, if not impossible, to correct. And then you're just kind of in management mode with those animals. So if that is something that you want to avoid, you do want to make sure that when you meet your breeder, you are interacting with the animals and you're seeing a positive, confident social response to your presence. Now, of course, you also want to make sure that you are asking questions. Come with a list, anything that you can think of. But really what we're going to gauge here is the willingness of the breeder to provide answers. So of course, basic things I always want to see people ask is about vet care. So what type of vet care not only do the puppies, kittens, or other receive, but what kind of vet care do mom and dad receive? What is their diet like? You want to ask the breeder why they chose that diet. What are the grooming requirements for the animal, any medical concerns. You can also ask about lineage. So why have they bred the bloodlines that they have bred? And that can give you a lot of input, not only about the animal you're hoping to bring home, but just the quality of that breeder and the amount of thought that they're putting into each litter that they are creating. And again, you're gauging that quality of the breeder by their willingness to answer questions. So breeders with something to hide are going to be reluctant or evasive. Breeders that know their stuff are going to be ecstatic that you're asking them questions in the first place. They're going to really want to talk about what they're doing, and that's a sign of a good breeder. And of course, you want to meet the parents. So whatever baby you are hoping to bring home, you want to meet mom and dad. Not only do you want to meet them just to make sure they're of good health, but you want to see what their temperaments are like, because they're going to have a lot of input in the early development of the offspring that you're hoping to add to your family. So you are going to want to assess how they interpret the world and how they approach strangers and new environments and new scenarios. With that, you also want to ask for a complete medical history, not just for the young animal you're bringing home, but also for the parents as well. We want to make sure that we are checking for things like genetic issues or other concerns. So if mom was unwell during the pregnancy, that may have an impact on her offspring. And that's just something that you should be informed of before you bring a young animal home. And of course, I advocate for patience. If you are dealing with a quality breeder, it's not going to be a quick process. So most breeders that have high standards for their own practices have equally high standards for the homes that they send pets home to. So you'll find that there may be an application process not too dissimilar from what you would experience with a shelter or a rescue group. And while yes, that can be tedious and sometimes seems invasive, I know we all ask a lot of questions before we send animals home to families, but it's because we have their best interests at heart. And you're gonna see that with a quality breeder as well. You may also find with quality breeders that they don't let you pick the animal you're bringing home. They're going to ask you a lot of questions about what you want from your pet, what you're hoping to do with your pet. And because they know those young animals so well, a good breeder may say, you know what, I know you really like this puppy with the black spots. However, this all black puppy is really what you're looking for. And you really want to heed their suggestions because they're going to know those puppies or kittens or other much better than you would from those first greetings. And they're going to be able to pair you fairly accurately with the pet that you're looking for. And that's something that you should expect, again, from a quality breeder. Okay. All right, so that gets us started. So we know if we want a pet, it has to be a family decision. Everybody's got to be on board. We want to make sure we're assessing for allergies. Of course, I want to promote adoption, but if you do choose to go the breeder route, just again, do your due diligence, do your homework, and make sure you're finding somebody reputable and of quality. Now we want to get into the nitty-gritty of what you really should be considering and doing before your pet comes home. And that is the key word here. This is all stuff that we want to do before we have our animal. And quite frankly, maybe even before you have picked out an animal, before you've decided to go to the shelter to meet a specific dog or cat, or before you've picked out your breeder. This is the kind of stuff you want to get out of the way and be prepared for long before the animal is in your home. Okay. So first and foremost, I must stress that bringing a pet into your home should be a lifelong commitment. So we want to see animals going to one home and staying there. And if we prepare properly, we can reach that goal. So think specifically about what you want to be doing with your pet. Why do you want to add an animal to your home? Is it for companionship? So you are just looking for somebody to hang out with, maybe take some casual strolls with, watch TV with, just sort of general family stuff. Are you looking for an exercise partner? So are you looking for a higher energy animal that maybe is going to motivate you to get out and hike or run? Or are you already an avid athlete and you're looking for an animal partner for your athletic endeavors? Perhaps you're looking for a friend for your other pets. That's something that we see very commonly, and we'll address that a little bit later on as well. But with that, you're going to have some very specific considerations, and you are going to want to consider what your existing pet needs more than what your needs are. So we have to, in those cases, match the animal personalities and then worry about whether or not we fit into that picture later on. Maybe you're looking for a travel buddy, someone to go and see the world with you. Or perhaps you're looking to add a pet to your home to teach responsibility to your children. Whatever your goal is for your pet, all of these are 100% acceptable and lovely reasons to add an animal to your home. But make sure you're very clear about why you want to bring a pet home and that you are sharing that with whatever professional you choose to go to select a pet, whether that be a shelter or a breeder. You want to be very specific about why you want to add a pet to your home, because that'll allow us to help match you to the exact right individual. Again, whether you're going to a shelter or a breeder, those professionals are going to need that input to help you select the right animal. Okay. Now, other things to consider. What is your daily schedule like? So we'll talk about this a little later on because I know our schedules are a little bit wonky right now, but you definitely want to think about what your normal is. You know, are you away from home most of the day? So are you going to leave an animal pining for you and staring out the window? If that is the case, you work 8, 10, 12 hours a day and everybody in the household is gone for that extended period of time, you might be better bringing an adult pet into your home. If you're gone for the bulk of the day, it's not really an appropriate environment to bring kittens or puppies or young rabbits into the home because they need your input and guidance. One, to learn the basic manners we want them to have, such as house training or litter box training, for example. But they also need you to form their personalities. So when they're younger, they are sponges. They absorb everything in their environment, and what they absorb shapes who they will be for the rest of their lives. And if we leave them alone for long periods of time, that is typically going to shape some pretty negative behaviors that we don't necessarily want to see. So we see destructive behaviors, we see house soiling, and in many cases we see animals that either become overly exuberant and difficult to handle around people, or the reverse and very shy and withdrawn. So an adult pet that's already has an established personality is better equipped to deal with a home where their people are not around as frequently. You'd also want to look for a low to moderate energy animal, one that doesn't require your constant attention and input to burn off any excess energy. And you might be wanting to look for an animal that's a little bit more independent. So you don't want a super clingy dog if you're gone for 8 to 12 hours a day. Now, if you work from home, then perhaps you can take on those animals that need additional attention, whether those be really high energy kiddos that just need you to take them out on walks or for play dates, or do a lot of training with them, or if it's an animal that maybe has a medical concern or just needs a little bit more maintenance. That's definitely for you if you've got a little bit more time available to share with them. And then if you travel frequently, I never like to dissuade anybody from having a pet. You can certainly add an animal to your home, but you want to make sure that they're relatively low maintenance, not just for your own comfort and ease, but also for the comfort and ease of anybody that you are going to be paying to take care of your pet while you are away. You're also going to want to look for an animal that's relatively easy to care for, and sociable will be key. So at the shelter, we've definitely encountered that, animals that get surrendered because the owner or the family is gone a lot of the time and they rely on pet sitters, and the pet sitters are having difficulty handling the animal without the owner present. So that's definitely something to consider. And our daily schedule, our normal daily schedule, should be a massive factor in deciding whether or not we're ready to have an animal in our home, and also a major component in the decision-making process for selecting an animal to add to our home. The next major consideration should definitely be your activity level. So this is a question that I think is probably on every shelter and rescue application, and something that breeders are probably going to ask you as well. So do you have a very active household? Are you an avid runner? Do you hike frequently? Do you have kids that want to run around with a dog in the backyard? But the biggest thing here is make sure that you are being honest. So when we refer to very active at the shelter, we are largely referring to very high energy, typically working breed animals. So this will most often apply to dogs. So for example, I have a cattle dog that I actually adopted from the shelter that was surrendered because she was, well, difficult to handle and she was destroying the house, but she is a high energy working bred cattle dog that was living in an apartment with people that were largely sedentary, which, no judgment here. I love sitting on the couch as much as anybody, but that was not the right dog for that situation. So she is a high energy girl. So just to give everyone some perspective about what that means, when a shelter employee or a breeder is referring to high energy, my cattle dog and I run 10 miles every single day. I do flirt pull with her for 10 to 15 minutes every day. We usually play a game of fetch for 30 minutes or so every day, and we train for about 30 minutes or so every day. So just for her, I have to commit 2 to 3 hours out of my life each and every day to ensure that her needs are being met. And that's what you should expect when you take on a very active, high energy dog. Now, where most people are more comfortable and confident is in the moderately active category. So moderately active animals are going to be your basic companion animals. These are the animals that just really want to spend time with you. And if you want to go for a walk or a run, they are in. If you want to hike on the weekends, awesome. If you want to sit on the couch all day on a rainy Sunday afternoon and do a Netflix binge, they are right there with you. That is the animal that most families are comfortable with because you can spend all day with them. and they love it. But if you only have an hour or so to commit to their energy needs, that's okay as well. And this is where most people find themselves to be comfortable. And quite frankly, most dogs tend to fit into this category. A lot of cats fit into this category as well. And most small animals will fall under this general moderate activity. They do need some of your attention, but they don't need all of it. And then, of course, we have some sedentary households. And again, no judgment, I can couch potato with the best of them. So if you want to mostly hang out on the couch, if you know that maybe you're more of a video game sort of a person or a movie watching individual, you're going to want a low energy pet. So that can be a smaller animal whose energy needs can mostly be met within the confines of their habitat that you've provided for them, or maybe a lower energy cat that is content to maybe bat around a wand toy for a few minutes and then take a nap. And here you'd probably largely be looking at adult or senior animals. Young animals are just going to need a bit more from you than you're likely wanting to commit to if you lead a more sedentary lifestyle. So with this particular category in consideration when choosing a new pet, this is the one area where I definitely stress honesty is so vital. We get a lot of folks that want to be very active, so we get those responses at the shelter, but then when we pair them with those field-bred labs or those cattle dogs and border collies, they are overwhelmed very quickly. So you want to make sure that you're being honest, and not only just with the professionals you're seeking an animal from, but with yourself about what you really want to commit to when you bring an animal home. And we've talked about this a little bit, but before you bring an animal home, you want to make sure you understand and are very clear about who is going to be providing care. So make sure you're setting clear, realistic expectations. And I'm just stressing this again because we hear this a lot at the shelter. Children are going to get distracted. So we have to be realistic about the level of involvement that they're really going to have with their pet, and make sure that before that pet comes home, there are clearly defined responsibilities and a willingness to compromise. So if the agreement is that your 10-year-old child is going to scoop poop every Sunday, if you bring home a dog, you have to understand that there's going to be some Sundays they're not going to do it. And there has to be somebody else in the family that's willing to take up that care need for your animal. Now, you also want to have a very clear picture of where your pet will live. And one of the biggest considerations is whether or not they're going to be inside or outside primarily. If they are going to be outside, you need to make sure that you have an appropriate shelter prepared. So this is a little bit above and beyond the dog kennel that I have shown here on the screen, but this is an ideal situation. You're looking for housing that's going to keep your pets warm, dry, and protected from the wind. And Illinois, the law states that a shelter for a pet to live outdoors has to be up off the ground, has to be protected on at least 3 sides so they can get out of the wind, and have a roof. It also has to be big enough for your pet to get into and turn around comfortably without having any body part exiting the shelter. So make sure you know the law. So that's the general Illinois laws. Each individual county may have additional criteria that must be met for a pet to live outdoors. And of course, you want to educate yourself on any potential hazards. So if your pet is primarily or solely an outdoor animal, they are going to have a higher risk of disease simply because they are exposed to more. There's also going to be an issue with altercations with predators, especially if you've got a small animal like a rabbit. It's almost impossible to predator-proof a rabbit hutch. Foxes and raccoons find a way to get in. So that's definitely inherent risk that you're taking by keeping your animal outside. And all animals that live outdoors, whether they be dog, cat, or other, do generally experience a shortened lifespan. Now, because of those things, most shelters, DuPage County included, will not adopt out to a family that wants to keep an animal solely outdoors. However, many breeders, especially breeders of working breed animals, will allow that, again, as long as those standards of care are being met when you're choosing a shelter. Now, what's more common is to choose to have your pet live inside with you. So when you are choosing that option, there are still additional considerations. You have to decide if you're going to do crate training, if you're bringing home a dog. If you're not crate training, and it's not for everybody, you do want to make sure that your pet has a safe space, and that will apply to all animals. They need a place where they can go where we know they need some time away from us. So just like we need me time every once in a while, so do our pets, and they need a location where they can get that, especially if a pet is coming into a home with children. Pets and children form amazing relationships. I still think back of my childhood dog with just absolute love and fondness, but I am sure there were times where I irritated her. I was a child, I was loud, I moved fast, I was always on the go, and she probably just wanted to lay down from time to time. So it's really important that they have space to get away if they need to, and that the adults in the household help facilitate that if necessary. And then for your animals, you also have to decide if and when they will have free roam of the house. So with young animals, that should be granted slowly over time to ensure that house training or litter box training is fully understood, and also to make sure they don't get into things that they shouldn't. If you have a small animal in the home, we have many adopters who have rabbits that free roam in their house. That does take a fairly significant commitment to make sure that the home is rabbit proofed, so there's nothing they can get into to hurt themselves if they're not being observed. So that's definitely something to consider as well. If you are going to have a pet that you're going to grant free roam to, you have to decide if it's safe for them and at what point in their life cycle you want to grant that privilege. And then, of course, you definitely want to consider enrichment. So our pets being indoors, especially if we're gone all day at work, sometimes that can get boring. So we have to make sure that we're providing them with the toys, with the training, with exercise before and after work, to make sure that they are fulfilled both physically and mentally. So that way they can live a happy, healthy life with us. Now, probably one of the biggest things that I think you should consider before choosing a pet, but one of the things that also gets overlooked the most frequently is the financial investment. So you really have to be honest about how much you're willing to spend on your pet. You're definitely going to have one-time expenses, which will be things like adoption or purchase fees. Of course, you're going to need startup supplies. So that first trip to the pet store is usually the doozy. That's when you're getting the bed and the bowls and the food and the treats and the toys. And a lot of times we go a little overboard because we're excited about our new pet, but that can be a pretty significant cost. If you're not adopting, you may have to also absorb a spay or neuter fee, microchipping, licensing, and then vaccines as well. So there might be some additional medical costs. And even if you do choose to adopt, most shelters, DuPage County included, at least strongly request, if not require, that you take your pet to the veterinarian within the first 2 weeks of having them in your home, just to address any medical issues that may pop up due to the stress of the move from shelter to home. Then on top of that, you are going to have some annual costs. So food and treats are going to be a constant thing. You will have annual wellness exams and vaccines, possibly, not all pets. So small animals don't require vaccines, but they should still see the veterinarian at least once a year. You may have some preventative medical expenses, such as flea and tick or heartworm prevention. And of course, toys and then general care supplies, whether that be litter, a scoop, or a new leash. Those are all going to be things that pop up periodically, maybe not every year, but at least several times throughout your pet's life. And then, of course, there's going to be training, primarily if you're bringing home a dog, but you may need to hire or engage with a pet professional for behavioral issues for a wide variety of animals, from cats to rabbits to other. That is something that you should factor into your potential annual cost for your pet. Sorry, let's scooch back. Now, other things to consider are the availability of professional care for your animal. So here on the slide, you can see I've provided a little graphic. This is from petfinder.com, where they estimated a little bit about the first year costs and then annual costs for dogs and cats. So you can see it can be relatively low, from a couple $100s to almost $2,000. And that's assuming that your animals stay healthy. If there's a medical emergency, those costs can double and even triple annually. So that's definitely something to consider. I always advocate for people to try to put aside an emergency fund for their pets. You never know when something is going to happen. I myself went through this recently. 2 years ago, my horse suffered a pretty catastrophic leg injury. Thankfully, I had emergency funds, but that definitely increased my annual spending for his care. You also need to consider the type of animal you're bringing home. There are definitely going to be pets that are going to be a bit more costly to maintain. And that could be breed specific. So for dogs, a great example would be bulldogs is one that always comes to mind. Bulldogs are notorious for having allergy issues because they have all of those adorable folds in their face. It's not uncommon for them to get skin infections. They can get cherry eye, which is caused when their niacin gland, their tear duct gland actually can pop out. That's a surgical, something that requires a surgical fix. So they can be fairly costly animals to maintain. So that's definitely something to consider when you're choosing a pet, not just whether you're choosing cat or dog, but if you are looking for a specific breed, get to know very well the common medical concerns that are associated with that breed. If you are choosing a small animal, I know a lot of folks go the small animal route because that initial one-time expense tends to be much, much lower, but they can be more expensive in the long run. So small animals, whether we're talking hamsters, gerbils, guinea pigs, or rabbits, are considered exotic animals. So your typical veterinarian that sees dogs and cats does not see these animals. So you either have to find a practice that has an exotic veterinarian on staff or go to an exotic animal hospital. And their costs tend to be a bit more. So for example, the average cost for just a vet visit for a dog in this area ranges from $40 on the low end to possibly $70 to $80 on the high end. Most fall somewhere in the middle. The average cost for a rabbit to see a veterinarian in this area at the low end is $80. To the high end is more around 120, and that's just for that wellness exam every year. So you can imagine if you have a rabbit that falls ill, it's going to get very expensive very quickly. So you just have to be prepared for that and not shocked when those costs come in if you do choose to have a small animal for your pet. Now, a few other things to consider, allergies, of course, and those are going to be yours. Make sure you're being honest with yourself. So we have definitely seen people that have considered adoption that we have counseled at the shelter that came in and said, you know, I was very allergic to cats when I was younger, but I think now with some Benadryl, I'd be fine. Those are the folks that we send home with a blanket covered in cat fur to see how they feel about that after a night of trying to sleep. You have to be realistic about what you can and cannot handle in your home. You also want to think about size requirements, and that's typically going to be the animal. Is your house big enough for them? So can we physically fit the animal in our home? We have seen a number of folks that have had to surrender pets because they live in an apartment and either the apartment had a weight limit that they tried to skirt around, or they realized that the Great Dane that weighs 130 pounds is not the best fit for a studio. So just really consider that before you add an animal to your home, especially if you're going to be bringing a young animal in. Make sure you have a good understanding about how big they're going to be when they're all done growing. And then handleability. So basically, how many cuddles do you need? If you are looking for a pet that's going to be on your lap and by your side or allow you to scoop them up and carry them around the house, that's a very specific need that you should share with the pet professional that's helping you find your ideal pet. There are going to be certain breeds that are known to be more aloof versus those that are known to be more laser focused on their person. And then of course with small animals, the ability to handle them, carry them, snuggle them is going to be limited. So they are all prey animals. They don't care for being picked up and held, with some exceptions. There always will be the rare few. And even with general petting and interactions, that usually requires a fair bit of patience and training and just quite frankly, time for that animal to adjust to you. So if you do have a family that's looking for a pet where the kiddos can play with the animal and again, carry it around and snuggle it, a bunny may not be the best choice, even though they seem small and relatively easy to care for. You might want to be looking at an alternative animal to be a companion for your children. Now, one of, I think, the biggest questions that we get at the shelter is all about breed. Humans love to label things, so we care very much about what type of breeds we have in our home, whether we have cats, dogs, rabbits, or other. And of course, there are going to be some breeds, again, that are more notorious for being affectionate versus others that tend to be more aloof. But if we ask that question, does breed matter? My honest answer is no, it doesn't. Breed does not equal behavior. So when we talk about breed, there are going to be some circumstances where animals are going to display breed typical behaviors. So for example, we'll use dogs. Herding. So this is a cattle dog doing exactly what a cattle dog should do. Not only have they been bred to herd, they've actually been bred to very specifically nip and bite at the ankles of animals. Where border collies actually, if anybody's had the privilege of seeing a border collie herd sheep, they have more of a hide and stalk behavior. They get low and then they creep up. Cattle dogs are a little bit more assertive in their herding techniques, and they get right in there and tend to use their mouths to direct animals. So if you brought a herding breed dog into your home, it shouldn't be a shock that they use their mouths. So I have a very well-trained cattle dog. We spend a lot of time on her enrichment needs, and she's mouthy. She still is mouthy. And I have trained her that when she feels compelled to use her mouth to pick up a toy instead, but that did take a lot of work and commitment on my end to achieve that. But I'm not surprised or shocked by the fact that she wants to use her mouth when she's excited. She's a cattle dog, she's supposed to. So that's definitely something you want to be aware of. Would I advocate for my cattle dog to go to a home with children? I absolutely wouldn't, because she's going to get excited and forget herself, and she's going to use her mouth, and she won't mean it maliciously, but she could still hurt somebody on accident. You may also see things like pointing behaviors. This is one of my favorite things. I love pointing dogs. So this is a dog that has alerted, and this is actually not a dog that has been trained to be a hunting companion at all. This is just an inherent instinctive behavior that we have bred into these dogs. So you may see these sort of alerting behaviors in your pointer dogs and other hunting breeds as well. And then we have actually even developed certain breeds of dogs for guarding. So Rottweilers are a big one. They have gotten an unfair bad rap, mostly because they have been mishandled by owners that largely were well-meaning, but just didn't really know what they were bringing home. So we have bred Rottweilers for years, centuries even, to guard and protect their families. So it shouldn't be a shocker if your Rottweiler is maybe not as open to meeting strangers as say a golden retriever would be. That doesn't mean that you can't work with that. And just like I taught my cattle dog to pick up a toy instead of use her mouth on people when she's excited, you can definitely work with Rottweilers to form positive associations with people. But you shouldn't be surprised if that inherent instinct is there. Now, that being said, just because I've given these examples, it doesn't mean that every cattle dog uses their mouth, that every pointer points, and that every Rottweiler guards. So behavior is a very complex thing, and it really develops from nature and nurture. So you've got a mix of genetics and environment that play a role in how your animal is going to perceive the world and respond to it. Additionally, all animals are individuals, so we really can't judge a book by its cover. So even, again, that I told you that cattle dogs use their mouths, it doesn't mean that every cattle dog will. So you really need to meet the individual animal, interact with them, have your family interact with them, and get that insight from the animal professional that knows them best to get some good insight into whether or not that specific pet would be a good fit for your family. So really, again, I can't stress enough, get to know the animal in front of you and try to put blinders on. Don't worry about what you've heard about the breeds or what you've seen some other animal of the same breed do. Know the animal in front of you. They don't read the textbooks, so they don't know how they're supposed to behave. So they really look to us for a lot of guidance. And in many cases, behaviors can either be managed or changed. Again, my cattle dog, for example, she is a mouthy cattle dog. She's very classically cattle dog. And it took just a little bit of time and effort from me, and she learned how to pick up a toy instead, and that behavior is well managed, and she has an outlet for it. So I don't punish her for doing what she instinctively wants to do. We just put it somewhere positive so she's not irritating or hurting anybody on accident. Now, when you are ready to welcome your pet into your home, so you've done your homework, you know where you're going to get your pet, you have a good idea about what type of pet would fit your home in terms of activity level, in terms of financial investment, you've done your research on what your needs are, you know the different breeds, you know what might be an inherent behavior you may have to work with. Now you're ready to welcome a new animal into your home. And when you do that, you really want to set your pet up for success as best as you are able. So always think of following the 3 P's. So the first P is patience. Be ready for an adjustment period. And that's going to be regardless of where you get your animal from, whether you are getting a puppy or a kitten from a breeder and they're going from one lovely home or facility to yours, which will be equally as lovely, or if they're coming from a shelter to your home. That's a huge adjustment for any animal, especially if you're getting a youngster. You always keep in mind they just left their mom, they just left their siblings, now they've changed environments and they're with strangers. That's a big deal, and that's a lot to take in. So imagine if somebody took you as a 2-year-old away from your parents and then moved you to a place where nobody even spoke your language. You know, that's a big adjustment, and it's scary. And you'll see the same thing even with adult dogs. So I know, for example, one big question that we get from a lot of adopters, especially regarding dogs, is whether or not they're house trained. But our answer is always unknown, and always expect accidents in your home. Even the most well-trained dog, when they go to a new environment after all of this upset, they're likely to regress a little bit. So things like potty accidents are definitely going to occur during an adjustment period. You might find that they are not as confident as they were when you met them at the breeder or the shelter. They're adjusting, and it's going to take them a little while. So patience is definitely key, as well as setting realistic expectations. You cannot expect your new pet to strut out of the car in your new house, be ready to meet the entire neighborhood, play with the dogs down the street. It takes time, and you need to allow your pet the time to adjust. Planning is our second P. And again, I'm going to reiterate, we want to educate ourselves, do our research, make sure we know everything we can possibly absorb about the type of animal that we have chosen to bring into our home, and that you have everybody in the family on board with that animal's care. Okay. And then lastly, preparation. That is our final P, and that is absolutely essential. So make sure that you have your home set up before you bring your pet into it. So that means that you should have their living space ready to go. So for a small animal, they should have their exercise pen or their cage set up. Bedding should be in it, enrichment items should be hung, food and water should be filled and ready to go. For cats, the litter box is already set up. They've got a bed, there's toys, again, food and water. Same thing with a dog. And ideally, you want to have this all set up in a safe space, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So that way that animal can have some much needed rest and quiet time. The biggest thing I have to stress here, again, as a shelter employee, I've seen this go wrong so many times. Please do not take your new pet to the store to buy their own supplies. So a lot of folks think that that would be a really lovely bonding experience, and I definitely understand the mentality. It would be fun to take your new puppy or kitten to the store and show them off and let them get pets and let them pick out a favorite toy. But again, consider how overwhelming that is for the animal. So now they've left the home or shelter they're familiar with, they've left the other animals that they know, the people that they know, they had to get into a car, which they may have little to no experience with, or possibly even negative associations. They're riding with strangers, and then they get taken to a large store that has so many crazy smells where sounds echo. It is just a recipe for disaster, and it can actually damage the bond that you're starting to form with your new pet, because they want to trust you and then you've taken them somewhere very scary. So we want to make sure we're taking our pets home where everything is already ready to go for them so they can settle in. Okay. Now, when you are bringing your pet home, again, not only is it important for you to have all of their stuff ready to go, you want to make sure it's set up in a safe space. So that is another major mistake that we see many pet owners make, just simply because we're enthusiastic and we love our pets, and I 100% get it. But we cannot expect them to come into a home and meet everybody that we know and be ready to play right off the bat. So we really need to give them some time to decompress. And in fact, at the shelter, we recommend 2 weeks where they're allowed to exist primarily or entirely, depending on the pet, in a safe space, and only interact with members of the family that live in the household. It allows them to decompress, to shake off that stress, to get their bearings, and to start building that very important bond with their new people. So when you are establishing a safe space in your home, you want to try to choose somewhere that's a little bit off the beaten path. So for me, for example, I live in a raised ranch. We primarily live in our upper level. Downstairs, we have a barely used family room, and then a spare bedroom that we really don't use a whole lot for anything. So when I've brought new pets home, they tend to hang out in the spare bedroom at first. So that is going to be where I set up their bed and their food and water, and I maybe a crate, toys, whatever I need. It's all going to be in there for them. It's going to be vacuumed and dusted ahead of time. I'm going to make sure it's temperature controlled, so there's no drafts, no weird sunspots they can't get away from that might cause them to overheat, and that it's animal proofed. So nothing that they can ingest that is hazardous, no cords or anything that they can chew on or get tangled up in. So what you'll need to establish this, I'm a big advocate for exercise pens. So you can see here in this particular scenario, this puppy got set up in the kitchen. I would advocate for a quieter space than that, but otherwise they've done pretty well. So here's an exercise pen. There's a crate if the puppy needs some quiet time or wants that security of being in a den-like environment. We've got plenty of toys, we've got a bed. And in this case, we've allowed the other household pet near the new animal. Towards the end of that 2-week decompression time, I would say that that is a lovely time to start introducing our pets. But at first, your new animal, if there are existing household pets, really need some space to themselves. So you want to make sure that they can stay separate at least for a little while. And even if they've already met your household pets, whether that have been at the shelter or the breeder, again, keep in mind they've gone through a pretty significant trauma. They're going to need some time on their own to adjust. Okay. Now, before we wrap up, I do want to mention some special considerations on top of the general research that we should be doing to prepare for a pet, on top of setting up our house appropriately to welcome a new pet. We need to really consider what our lives are like right now because of the pandemic and our shelter-in-place orders, which will be lifting to some extent right now, but for some of us that may mean we go back to work. For some of us, it might mean that we're still working from home or that we're just working a bit differently. Regardless, for the most part, we're all home a lot more these days. And that sounds pretty awesome initially, right? We get to spend a lot more time with our pets. And that's a trend that a lot of shelters have seen recently. Adoptions have gone up because everybody is choosing now as a wonderful time to bring their pets home. And in some cases, it is. You know, if you're bringing home a puppy or a kitten and you want to work on litter box training or house training, well, you're home all day long. This is an awesome time to get some of those behaviors well learned and fluent for that animal. So when you go back to work, hopefully they know the routine and they're able to hold it for a dog or to accurately go to a litter box if they're a cat. But this is not our normal. So you want to be very, very careful if you are bringing an animal into your home right now. So there is a fairly significant concern in the animal welfare community that we're going to see a high number of surrenders once people go back to normal and we're working our typical work days because we are potentially setting up our pets to have some behavioral issues because we've changed our schedule so dramatically. Now, for animals that are already in your home, that already had an established routine, this change in our schedule where we're home with them all day long and then eventually where we're going to be gone again, probably won't affect them much. They'll adjust. You might have a couple rough days where there's some potty accidents or some needy behavior, but by and large, well-adjusted animals that are used to our previously established schedule will adjust again and return to normal. For animals that we've brought into our homes during this time, that is going to put them into a tailspin because they've come to this new environment, they finally got their bearings, they've adjusted, but they've adjusted to you being with them pretty much 24/7. And then when we go back to work, that's a huge change for them again. So we want to help any pets that we bring into our home, whether it's cat, dog, or other, and set them up for success when our lives go back to normal. So try to maintain a realistic schedule. You want to encourage independence with your pets. Reward them for settling into their quiet space. So if you have a crate set up for your dogs, sometime during the day, try to put them in it. Give them something awesome to chew on, give them a tasty treat, and encourage them to have some quiet time while you're in the other room. So there is some separation and a reward for that separation as well. You also want to make sure you're taking time away from your pet, whether that be going to the grocery store or even just doing things like taking a walk, but without your dog in tow. So that way, again, they know that it's okay if you leave, that you will be back, and that they don't need to spend every second of every day at your side. That is going to be really essential for successful integration into a home for a new pet that's coming in during this time. The coronavirus has afforded people a lot of opportunities to consider adding an animal to their home, but it might be setting pets up for some trouble down the road. And quite frankly, as a trainer and a pet professional, I can't tell you exactly what to expect because we've never seen anything like this before. So we're not quite sure how our animals are going to interpret it. But definitely for those new animals that we're adding now, it's going to be a pretty big shock to their system when we're all back to work again. So definitely keep that in mind and try to maintain a routine that's as close as possible to what the routine would be like when you're working your typical 9 to 5, for example. All right, so that is my last bit of advice. So if anybody has any questions, I would be happy to answer them. Otherwise, if any questions pop up in the future, I have included my email address at the shelter. It's humane.education@dupageco.org. I am always happy to answer any questions for anybody interested in adding a new pet to their home. Even if you're not intending to adopt from DuPage County, I am still here and happy to help.